Falcons head coach Raheem Morris announced Tuesday that Michael Penix Jr. will start Sunday at home against the Giants. Cousins has 9 interceptions and 1 touchdown pass in his last 5 games. Review, we have made the decision Michael Penix Jr. will be the Atlanta Falcons starting quarterback moving forward.
The Atlanta Falcons made one of the most intriguing decisions of the offseason this past year when they decided to not only sign Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million contract, but also spend a top 10 pick on one of the older quarterbacks in the NFL draft. And now it seems like they kind of made the right decision because this franchise clearly needs to head in a different direction. So before we get to the content, I apologize if my voice is a little off. I currently caught a bit of a cold. We're on this grind to 1 million subscribers. Make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications to help us get to 1 million before the new year. And now that we get all of that out of the way, work! We made money the last 2 times we got a free square, and now PrizePicks is giving us one for Christmas Day. All Nikola Jokic needs is 1 point on Christmas Day for his square to hit. So we just have to pair this with 1 more square to 3x our money. I was able to do this with Tyreek Hill on Thanksgiving and Patrick Mahomes this past weekend, and I give away all my picks on my Instagram story at the Flight Mike and Snapchat Flight Mike Snap. If you want to take advantage of this promo, click on the link in the description down below or use my promo code Mikerophone to get $50 when you make an entry of $5 or more. And thank you, PrizePicks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? During the NFL draft, fans were wondering who were the Atlanta Falcons going to take. After all, this was a team that's had a bit of a mixed bag in the NFL draft recently. Some of these picks turned out to be incredible picks, like AJ Terrell in the 2020 NFL draft, who at the time scouts said this was a gigantic reach. But then came probably their biggest mistake of all time, selecting Kyle Pitts with the 4th overall pick in the 2021 NFL draft. Craziest part was this was the same offseason that the Atlanta Falcons were moving on from Julio Jones. So at the time, fans were speculating that the Atlanta Falcons were going to build their entire offense around Kyle Pitts, and they selected him over the likes of Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Penn Sewell, Patrick Surtain II, Devontae Smith, Micah Parsons, Rashawn Slater. You guys get the gist. And then the year after, they selected Drake London with a top 10 pick once again. And it's kind of funny because they got the number 8 pick for 3 straight seasons following this. So they used the first one on Drake London, a great sub 1,000 yard receiver that fans really believe could become a Pro Bowler once he actually has a legitimate quarterback throwing him the football. The next year, they decided to draft Bijan Robinson with the 8th overall pick, which wasn't a bad pick, but fans were also confused because you don't really take a running back in the top 10 of the NFL draft unless if you have every other aspect of your team figured out. And in the case of the Atlanta Falcons, they definitely could have used a player like Jalen Carter, but it's not like Bijan Robinson's a bad player at all. Ironically, the ideal scenario where you do draft a running back in the first round of the NFL draft would come a few picks later. The Lions had so many leftover picks from their rebuild that they literally just reached for Jahmyr Gibbs, and they had the right to do it. They've been hitting on all their other picks. And then came this past year's NFL draft, a year where Falcon fans were very excited because they were able to get the best quarterback in all of free agency in the form of Kirk Cousins. So fans were thinking, who are they going to draft to help Kirk Cousins? Is it going to be Rome Odunze? Hell, Ryan Poles even speculated that Rome Odunze was going to get selected by the Falcons.
My gut tells me it's Rome.
Michael
Penix. Shane, you okay with this?
And alas, they decided to select Michael Penix Jr., a Heisman Trophy candidate who did suffer a torn ACL when he was in Indiana, who also had a poor showing in the national championship, who was also a little older for a quarterback entering his first year in the NFL. Penix was just 2 months away from turning 24, so picking him as the developmental QB was seen as a little controversial. There's this viral clip of the Atlanta Falcons general manager explaining himself to the team owner, Arthur Blank, and fans were furious about this pick, primarily because of Penix's age, the spot at which he was drafted, the fact that the team had more pressing needs, the fact that the team already addressed the quarterback position in free agency, and on paper they did an excellent job addressing the position. I mean, I know many fans like to poke fun at Kirk Cousins' contract, but when you sign a quarterback in 2024 free agency for the 12th most money out of all QBs, you did a pretty good job. And to start out the season, Kirk Cousins performed incredibly. He started out the season being 2-1 in primetime games, the only loss being a very close, heartbreaking game to the Kansas City Chiefs. Through those 3 games, he had a combined 7 touchdown passes to just 2 interceptions, a 71% completion percentage, and nearly 1,000 yards. Both of the victories in primetime came in games that the Falcons were considered to be underdogs in, and in primetime against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he set a Falcons franchise record for passing yards in a game with 509 yards and a walk-off touchdown in overtime. I was still a little skeptical about the signing of Kirk Cousins, primarily because the zip on his throws seemed to be gone. So my brother is actually a podiatrist, and I was actually talking to him about this, and hopefully he'll make his own channel very soon once he graduates from residency. But I was talking to him about whether or not Kirk Cousins' Achilles tear from the season before is affecting the amount of velocity that he could put on his throws, and it absolutely is. Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles tendon on the very leg that he plants his foot to drive power in his throws. And if you just compare his throws with the Minnesota Vikings versus the Atlanta Falcons, he's throwing ducks out there. And this is the number one way you typically see quarterbacks retiring. They lose throwing power on their throws, they lose confidence in the types of throws that they can make, and that seems to have been happening to Kirk Cousins from week 9 and on. Since week 9, Kirk Cousins has been terrible, only throwing 1 passing touchdown, being this TD to Drake London on Monday Night Football. And honestly, that touchdown was more on Drake London than Kirk Cousins. If Kirk Cousins missed this, then he would have definitely been benched. Drake London ran a beautiful route here to get this wide open. But apart from that, he's thrown 9 interceptions, and some of them were very egregious interceptions. In our last video on the topic, we were primarily talking about the interceptions he threw against the Chargers, like the pick 6 he threw that literally looked like a paper airplane, or throwing it in triple coverage in the back of the end zone, or literally staring down Derwin James and throwing the ball to him. And over the past few weeks, it was more of the same. Ian Hertz posted this chart documenting quarterback efficiency. Now, this is from weeks 10 to 15, minimum of 125 plays. So EPA per play is an advanced statistic in football that stands for expected points added. If a quarterback has a positive EPA, then he's giving that team more points than they expect. And that's the y-axis over here. At the same time, we have completion percentage above expected, which is pretty self-explanatory. And as you go to the right, you see Jordan Love with the highest EPA per play. You see Lamar Jackson with a slightly higher completion percentage, but a little lower of an EPA per play. You see Jared Goff all the way up here, slightly lower completion percentage than Lamar Jackson, but at the same time, he had that 5 interception game, so that's probably tanking his numbers. If you go to the bottom right, Jalen Hurts has a positive EPA per play and has a higher completion percentage above expected. Geno Smith is a little lower on his EPA per play. He's in the negatives, but has the highest completion percentage above expected in the NFL in this time period. And then we go all the way to the left and you start seeing some names that you don't want to see. Players like Jameis Winston, Will Levis, CJ Stroud, who hasn't been performing super well in this latter part of the season, and then Kirk Cousins, who in totality I would say is the 3rd worst quarterback in the NFL during this time period. Next to Cooper Rush, the Cowboys backup QB, which I still don't know why the Cowboys won't start Trey Lance, but whatever, and Anthony Richardson, who is a developmental QB. And when you combine this with the performance that Kirk Cousins put together against the Las Vegas Raiders last night, a team that is a shoo-in to get the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft, then it's honestly a little concerning. Now, don't get it twisted, the Raiders aren't necessarily that terrible whenever it comes to pass yards allowed average, ranking in the top 10, but it's not just against the Raiders where Kirk Cousins has underperformed. Against the Raiders, he completed 11 of 17 for 112 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Against his former team, a game that you would think is a revenge game, he had 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but he had 344 passing yards. Against the Chargers, he had 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and threw for 245 yards. There's no question about it, when you take a look at all of these performances since week 9, ever since he faced off against the Dallas Cowboys, all of the games that the Falcons lost are Kirk Cousins Cousins' fault, but the Falcons were completely reluctant to bench Kirk Cousins, and you might be wondering why. One huge reason is the moment you insert Michael Penix into the lineup, you can't really change your mind anymore. That's your quarterback of the future. When it's his time, you better put him in, and that's it. And there's a pretty solid reason as to why the Falcons should start Michael Penix. I mean, their final 3 games are pretty good test games to determine whether or not Michael Penix is good enough to start next year. They're going up against the lowly New York Giants next week. Then they're going up against a pretty solid test, the Washington Commanders, who have a top 5 pass defense. And then they go up against the Carolina Panthers, who have been improving and have the 12th highest ranked passing defense. Believe it or not, all of these teams have pretty solid passing defenses. So you could make an argument that this could be a good test for Michael Penix because Kirk Cousins is clearly struggling and I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. At the same time, you could make the argument of what are the odds that Michael Penix could come in towards the end of the season, juice up the Falcons, and in his 4th game lead this team to a playoff victory. That's a lot to ask on a rookie, and I think that's where the debate begins. Are you better off just leaving Kirk Cousins in, even though he's been terrible since the middle of November, and hope he can figure it out? Or do you give Michael Penix some run and try to see if he could potentially take you even further? Because the Falcons have a good chance of winning the NFC South. They trailed the Buccaneers by 1 game, but the problem is, even if they do win the NFC South, what are the odds that we see another Kirk Cousins choke job in the playoffs? I mean, he's starting early this year. Now, the craziest part about this is, in the past, Raheem Morris would come out and straight up say, Kirk Cousins is our guy. And this time when he was asked, is Kirk Cousins still your starting quarterback? He said this.
We just got back, man. We still got to go through all that process like we always do. Obviously, getting back late last night, getting a big time win. We talked about it last night, Zach. You know, there's no secret. We didn't play well enough at the quarterback position.
And if you just compare this to other head coaches over the past year, I mean, you remember what Dave Canales said before he benched Bryce Young?
Bryce, our quarterback. We're going to just continue to shore up and fix the things we need to.
Or what happened to the Indianapolis Colts when they were flip-flopping between Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson? The stakes are a little bit different here, though. And the craziest part about this is the financial ramifications of the Atlanta Falcons decision. I did say in the earlier part of this video that this could have been way worse. And it could have been. You could have been the Dallas Cowboys and gave $60 million to a quarterback that didn't perform well to start the season and is now out with a hamstring injury. Cutting Kirk Cousins would cost them the most money. After the 2024 season concludes, Kirk Cousins will carry a dead cap hit of $65 million. A post-June 1st release designation would give Atlanta the ability to move $25 million of that salary cap penalty to the 2026 season. The NFL's 2024 salary cap is a record $255.4 million, and it's expected to increase again next year. You can thank those streaming programs for that. Are you guys excited to watch Christmas football on Netflix? No, I wasn't paid by Netflix to say that. And well, ultimately, the Atlanta Falcons would make their decision as we were making this video. So according to Ian Rappaport, the Atlanta Falcons are making a major change, as Michael Penix Jr. is expected to take over at quarterback, with Kirk Cousins going to the bench. Atlanta is still in the thick of the playoff hunt, and Cousins has struggled mightily. Now, Penix takes over. Rappaport mentions that the writing has been on the wall, and now it's official. The future is now for the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons even put out this statement. After review, we have made the decision that Michael Penix Jr. will be the Atlanta Falcons starting quarterback moving forward. This was a football decision, and we are fully focused on preparing the team for Sunday's game against the New York Giants. So I've said multiple times in this video that the Atlanta Falcons really prepared themselves for this situation. Not only did they draft Michael Penix in the top 10 of the NFL draft, but they signed Kirk Cousins to a relatively cheap and palatable contract. So the math, if the Falcons were to cut Kirk Cousins prior to the start of the 2025 league year, they would have $65 million in dead money. If they were to trade him, the $27.5 million base salary guarantee would transfer over to the acquiring team. So then the Falcons would just be responsible for the $37.5 million of the proration. It's neck and neck between the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I feel like this is the Atlanta Falcons trying to hit a home run. Bear in mind, teams don't have tape on Michael Penix, and I don't know if this is the Falcons making a decision to just throw Penix into the fire, or if he's been been that impressive with the second team in practice to the point where they decided to start him. But this is easily the biggest wild card for the remainder of the season. If you're desperate for a quarterback in fantasy football, Michael Penix is a dual threat QB and also has Bijan Robinson as his halfback. Now obviously the best option for the Falcons is to trade Kirk Cousins, but he has a no trade clause. And very quickly, a lot of people watching my content don't know what a no trade clause means. A no trade clause doesn't mean that you cannot be traded. A no trade clause means that you have to approve where you're getting traded to. So he would have to agree to his new destination, and a team would have to take on the full $27.5 million base salary that Cousins is owed in 2025. And the Falcons would only be on the hook for a dead cap hit of only $37.5 million. But the team that he gets traded to could agree to have the Falcons agree to pay a portion of Kirk Cousins' salary. Now, this trade will look very similar to the Colts trading Carson Wentz to the Commanders. You get a quarterback for a season. He doesn't seem to be the quarterback that you thought he'd be. And in this case, the team that is receiving the player would opt to pay the full contract amount of the player. But in return, the Falcons would probably have to give up like a second or a third round pick, which is relatively palatable for a team that's in a rebuild. And it's something that a rebuilding team might be down to do if it means that they could get their rookie QB some mentorship. Either way, I don't think Kirk Cousins has anything to be ashamed of, man. I mean, this man was drafted in the 4th round of a draft where his team gave up 3 first-round picks to move up to the number 2 overall pick to select RG3. The fact that he out-earned RG3 and made nearly $300 million in his career is awesome. Good for Kirk. Yeah, he's not going to be known as the greatest QB of all time, but he's played some good football. Clearly, his abilities are escaping him, but there's nothing to be ashamed of, man. I mean, at least he hasn't taken significant shots to the head. He's put together some respectable statistics throughout his career, and he's made a lot of money doing it. But if you're a Falcons fan, let me know in the comment section down below. Do you agree with this decision that the Falcons are about to make? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.